So, thank you, Melissa. I appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy that Melissa and the regional offices were able to set up this briefing for today. I think it's helpful to get together with everyone occasionally just to kind of go over what's some of the new threats that are on the scene in data security and offer some suggestions and tips on how you can protect not just your own data, but your office information. One of my big things is I also like to talk about how to protect your own data. And that's kind of what we're going to start with. So if we go to the next slide, we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. And this is just some of the things I'm going to talk about today, starting with identity theft, phishing scams, social engineering. This is some of the biggest risk to your data and your systems right now is your social engineering. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. How to actually protect personally identifiable information, your own information, and your office data. Also malicious codes, viruses, and ransomware attacks, because these are things that are obviously in the news all the time. We hear about them every day. Protecting your data and your networks. What are some of the tips and guidance that I can offer? Some of it you may be doing, some of it you may not be. And then we're going to sort of wrap up with your general office data handling safeguards, just giving some tips on how you can protect the data that you have in your office, and then wrapping up with incident response. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide on identity theft. So I think we all know at this point what identity theft is. Melissa, you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. Some of the things that I like to talk about is basically the three types, which is your financial, your medical, and your online. So financial obviously is one of the most prevalent, where someone is getting your key components of your information, your name, date of birth, social security number, and they're opening up accounts in your names, things of that nature. But also medical is becoming another big issue, where people are getting, medical bills in the mail for doctors they've never been to, procedures they've never even had. So that's becoming another big issue. And then obviously online, where, people are scamming you out of your information. They're ordering, setting up accounts in your name, doing all kinds of stuff. Now, some of the biggest targets are your elderly, and that's obviously just because, they're more vulnerable. And a lot of times, these scammers have gotten so good at, really pulling the wool over a lot of these elderly's eyes that they really don't realize what's going on until it's too late and their accounts have been basically drained. And now in the U.S., just some important facts here that I found with the Federal Trade Commission. They estimate that about 9 million cases of identity theft occur annually. That's in the United States. Basically, that amounts to about a new case every 22 seconds. So it's just amazing how quickly this fraud has been spreading. It really started back in the 1980s and the early 80s, and it just seems to be increasing every year with no end in sight. So let's go to the next slide. And this basically tells you what are some of the signs. What do you really need to look for? I definitely recommend, looking at your credit card statements, your bank card, statements that you get, just making sure there's no unexplained charges or bank withdrawals or anything suspicious on there. I can tell you that sometimes if you see let's say you have a credit card charge for $1, a lot of times those are thieves testing your cards to see if they're actually working. So anytime you see any suspicious activity like that, you want to jump on that immediately. Medical bills from doctors, from places you haven't visited, more and more people are becoming victims of identity theft through those types of measures. Credit cards that you didn't apply for. A lot of times these thieves, like I said, if they have your name, your social security number, the date of birth, it's pretty easy to get an address information and things like that. They'll open up these fraudulent credit cards in your name, and a lot of times it can happen for 4 to 6 months before you even realize what's happening. Also, checking your credit report, making sure there's no errors in it. This is a great way to find if there have been any sort of accounts opened up that you're not aware of. Obviously, getting collection notices or calls from unknown debtors. This actually happened to my brother-in-law one time. I was over at their house, and they got a call one evening from a debt collection agency about some stuff he had ordered and never paid for, and come to find out it was an identity theft situation. Denial on credit card applications, car loans. This is something that's becoming a lot more apparent right now, where people, they're applying for credit cards, trying to get car loans, even buying homes now, when they realize that there's been a denial on this application, and it basically comes down to identity theft, fraud, people that have got their information and have opened up a lot of things, and their credit's been ruined. Missing mail is another thing. I can honestly say with the U.S. mail right now, a lot of time there are delays in not getting information in a timely manner, but you just want to be cognizant to the fact that, if you were getting a credit card statement every month and then for a couple months goes by, you haven't received any, you want to be following up on that, because that's the possibility of someone who's opened up credit cards in your name. They have actually changed a lot of the mailing information to go to a different place just to, it's basically like a stall tactic where they can continue using that information and opening up more accounts. Also, errors on your tax return or your Social Security statements. That's another sign that there could be some issues of identity theft. And I can certainly tell you that with the IRS or the Social Security, they're not going to be calling you, asking you for information. Normally what they do is they will send, if there's an issue, they will send you a letter to notify you. So if you're receiving a call from someone claiming to be from the IRS, the Social Security, or they're even sending you emails, I would be very concerned about that. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. And this one is on what you can do. So there's actually a number of things here you can do. If you're a victim of identity theft, you can put a credit freeze on all of your accounts. That basically locks down your credit, and nobody will be able to have access to opening up fraudulent accounts in your name. Now, I can tell you the other thing that you can do is they also offer credit locks now. Even if you're not a victim of identity theft, you can take advantage of a credit lock. The only thing I would caution you about, if you do take advantage of a credit lock, you want to make sure that you're not in the process of purchasing a home or a car or anything of that nature, because sometimes that will create some issues in trying to get those applications through. But other than that, if you are good to go, you're not planning on making any major purchases, opening up new accounts, credit locks are actually a great idea and a good way to protect you. And the other good thing about this is it really doesn't cost you anything. There are a lot of companies out there now that offer credit monitoring. They charge you monthly fees, but a credit lock, you can pretty much do that free of charge. Do we have any questions from anybody before I move on? Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, but I want to try to keep this interactive. If you've got any questions, any questions at all, please don't hesitate to interrupt. So we're going to move on to phishing scams and social engineering. So Melissa, if you advance to the next slide, like I said, with phishing and social engineering, this is really becoming one of the biggest risks to your data and also your system data. And a lot of this results in malware attacks, ransomware attacks and things of that nature, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. But so phishing, basically, that's going to be a fraudulent email that appears to be from a reputable company that you're actually doing business with. And the key to this is a lot of these scammers have become very, very sophisticated, and they use these tricks to try to reveal you into, giving your information and gaining access to a system or a network, which is when they start downloading this bad malware, ransomware, things of that nature. An example would be you get an email from your IT department, and it basically says, we've seen some suspicious activity on your account. We need to change your password. Please click on this link and fill out information. A lot of times these emails look very legitimate. People will click on the URL link, they'll put in their information, and come to find out this is with a fraudulent company. And unfortunately, once you click on that link or you put your information in, that's when your account and your systems can be compromised. This is, like I said, phishing and social engineering is really one of the biggest threats I see in this day and age to personally identifiable information and also networks. It really accounts for about 22% of all data breaches. And just to give you a snapshot, in 2022, there was a huge increase in these phishing scams, about 61%. Now, some of the largest data breaches that I can tell you that have happened as a result of phishing and social engineering, basically one of the largest ones this actually occurred for 3 years. It went on from 2013 to 2016. It was with Yahoo. A lot of you all probably remember this, but it impacted about 3 billion user accounts. eBay was another one in 2014 with 145 million. And then we all remember Equifax, the credit reporting agency, back in 2017. That exposed 143 million customers' data. They wind up in a global settlement because there was a class action lawsuit, and that impacted about, like I said, 143 million customers. And I think the Federal Trade Commission basically fined them $425 million as a result of that suit. And most of that was just because of careless negligence on the part where they did not have their software and viruses up to date to protect something like this from happening. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this down the road, but I can tell you some of the easiest ways that an agency can prevent phishing and social engineering from happening is by training. Training is by far the cheapest and the best defense that you have as a director to make sure that these things don't happen, is just having security training, talking about staff being alert of these phishing and email scams. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide on protecting your personally identifiable information. So basically, these are some tips. We've already talked about, identity theft, social engineering scams, all of these things that do result in an impact, basically to ruin your good name or also your agency good name. So some of the things that is recommended is to review your credit reports about 3 times a year. The rule of thumb is at least 2. I actually recommend that you take a look at these 3 times a year just to make sure everything looks okay. Also, reviewing your bank statements, your credit card statements monthly. It's really imperative that you do take a look at these on a monthly basis just to make sure everything is up to speed. I can tell you in terms of bank statements, I will go in online and look at mine once a week just to make sure that there is nothing out there that looks suspicious. Be very cautious, once again, of opening up any suspicious emails from unknown sources. One thing that I would recommend is if you're getting an email from someone and you were not expecting it, and it's got an attachment or a URL link or something in there, the best thing to do is call call the person, ask them if they actually sent the email before you open it. You're going to be saving yourself a lot of heartache down the road. Obviously, don't click on links in emails or respond to anything requesting PII. Any legitimate company or business is not going to ask you to include your personally identifiable information in an email response. Also, inspecting ATMs, gas pumps, and other scanners for skimming devices. This is a very, very big problem, especially at gas pumps, where a lot of criminals are putting those sort of face plates. They're called scanners or skimmers, but they're putting these face plates directly over the slots where you slide in your credit card. And these skimmers are able to really collect a lot of information. And the thing that really concerns me is when you're using your debit cards. I actually tell people using a debit card in a lot of places is not recommended. I know that kind of goes against the rule of thumb where, you know, you don't want to be charging everything and have a large bill at the end of the month. The problem with debit cards is if you're using a debit card and it has a skimming device, things like that on it, if they get your PIN number, they're also going to be very quick at draining your bank account. So if you're using a debit card, which is linked to a checking or a savings account, once they get that PIN number, they can quickly delete those accounts. And I can tell you, banks are sometimes very reluctant to actually give you that money back. Using a credit card is very different. You know, when you apply for a credit card and you get that credit card, if you look at the fine print on those things, it always tells you this credit card is a property of the bank. If there's a credit card fraud, they will take the lead on researching that. Typically, they will, not have you be responsible for those fraudulent charges, and it's much easier to deal with. So just be cautious where you're using a debit card because of skimming devices. Some of the things I would recommend is, you know, if you're going to an ATM machine, for instance, and you want to withdraw money from your checking or savings account, and this ATM machine is not a bank ATM machine. Let's say it might be outside of a 7-Eleven store, or it might be in the corner of a mall somewhere. Those are the things I would be very cautious about because that's where a lot of these things happen. Do we have any questions from anyone before I move on? Let me ask a question. Has this actually ever happened to anyone before? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and move on. We'll open it up for questions at the end, and maybe we'll have time to share some stories here. I don't know. So basically, let's go.
Danny,
yes,
we do have one question in the chat. Their
Sure.
question was, how safe is Apple Pay?
That is a really good one. There are actually a ton of these apps out there now, especially where college kids are using a lot of these different apps to pay, stuff, and their parents are loading money on them. I think Apple Pay is one of the more safer ones. One thing I would suggest is, if you're using a lot of these applications on your phone, just make sure that you have a passcode on your phone so that if you lose that phone somewhere, someone, if they find it, they're not going to be able to get into that phone and get that information. So I would use a pretty good password, and we're going to be talking about passwords in a minute, but you want to use a really good password to where it would be difficult for some, person to get in and get that information off your phone. But I do think Apple Pay is one of the more secure ones. They've been around for a long time. So I think that one would be okay.
Thanks,
All right.
Danny. That's the only question. That's the only one I see in the chat right now. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide on malicious code and viruses. So If you advance it, what is ransomware? I'm sure this is something that all of you all have heard about. Ransomware is in the news practically every single day now. So what ransomware is, it's really a type of malware where fraudulent people use infected computers to encrypt files, and they basically lock them until a ransom is paid. So there's no way you can get that information. And after that initial infection happens, it will attempt to spread through other parts of your systems, including your shared drives, other parts of your networks and computers. So you kind of have to look at it as like a spider weaving, basically weaving a web. Once it gets started, it just sort of spins out from there and will keep going. So it's difficult to really stop once it begins. Now, something that I typically see in the last bullet here, we've had ransomware attacks reported to OCSE before. Typically, one of the things that I see is your last two, your crypt and your crypto locker are two of the most prevalent in terms of these that are being infected and basically locking down systems. Now, one of the biggest ransomware attacks was the WannaCry virus. I'm sure everybody's heard about that. And that infected more than 300,000 computers across 150 countries. And it resulted in about $4 billion in financial losses. So it is becoming a very big problem. So let's go to the next slide on how it occurs. I think that is it. Yes. So how does ransomware occur? So there's basically two ways. I've already talked about the first one where it can be delivered through, phishing emails, things of that nature. The second one can be a drive-by download. Now, these are not quite as common, but they can happen. And a drive-by download is basically a program that's automatically downloaded from the internet without your consent. And it may happen whenever you are out there just doing research, you're clicking on a link, you're going into Google, you're clicking on a company that you think is legitimate, and a lot of times that's where this malicious code may be downloaded as well. Now, I can tell you this happened to me back about 8 years ago. I work in security, I'm pretty savvy. But I will tell you, back about 8 to 9 years ago, I was actually doing some research for a security briefing I was going to be doing in Colorado, I think it was. And I was out there doing some research, and I clicked on what I thought was a legitimate link. And the next thing I know, right away, my computer started acting funny. Luckily, I still had the DCL line at the time. And I quickly yanked that thing out of the back of my computer. But luckily, no ransomware was involved, but I will tell you that I did get malware that had started to download on my laptop. So I had to disconnect it, take it to our IT department, and have them scrub the laptop, do some cleaning and wiping everything up on that. So it did take a while. So I think what I'm trying to tell you here is that, these things can happen very, very quickly. And oftentimes it happens before you even realize what's really going on. So just be careful anytime you're going to one of these websites. All right. Let's go on to the next slide.
And real quick, Danny, we do have a question in the chat. Question is,
Sure.
when it comes to cybersecurity, how effective is whitelisting?
I think it's pretty good. I will tell you, I haven't read a lot up about that, but I know a lot of the private companies right now are utilizing whitelisting and some of those tools as well. What I would advise you to do is check with your IT department, see if they're utilizing anything, or if they have any thoughts or suggestions on how you can incorporate that into the security of your program. All right, so basically tips to prevent ransomware. Um, Basically, one of the main things is updating and patching your systems and your networks. That's extremely important. Anytime that there is a patch that is issued, you know, uh, for your network, it's very imperative that those things get done in a timely manner. I've already mentioned being really, really cautious with any links, or when you're entering web addresses and things of that nature. Be careful opening up email attachments. Encrypting PII and sensitive information is really what's going to happen. You want to make sure that anything that you're sending can be encrypted so that it can't be hacked into, especially if it's sensitive information. But also verifying any email from those senders that come in. That's really the imperative thing. You don't want to open anything until you really know that that was a legitimate email that was sent to you. So you want to question it, do research, reach out to the parties that sent it, and just verify that it is a legitimate email. And then also installing antivirus software, firewalls, and email. That's really important. I think the really important thing here also is, a lot of staff have been working at home since COVID. Just reaching out to them. A lot of times the IT departments will, push these viruses, patches, updates out, just making sure that staff are doing the proper things they need to ensure that those patches, software updates, things like that are taking place, because that's really going to be one of the main keys in preventing ransomware. Like I said, the other one is really going to be training. I think those are really the top two. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. On protecting data and networks. Basically, I always tell people that, in terms of your agency, you've got three key components of your data: the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability. Obviously, the confidentiality, that basically just means that that data is going to remain secure from unauthorized access or disclosure. Integrity, basically meaning that, it can't be altered or manipulated in any fashion. Availability is very important. That basically means that that data is going to be there when you need it. It doesn't matter if it's 8 in the morning or 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night. So the question comes in, what happens if one of these components is, let's just say that it's not available, or something has happened to one of these crucial components? What do you do? And I think, and thinking through that, one of the best ways I can sort of explain this to everyone is going back to the Atlanta ransomware attack that happened in March of 2018. If you remember when that was back in the news, basically it impacted so many systems in Atlanta. Their IT department basically found that, in June of 2018, a third of their software programs were offline when this happened. And so it really created some major headaches for the city of Atlanta, because, it cost them over $3 million to recover from this. And trust me, that's just a low estimate. They never really said how much this ransomware attack actually cost, but it was somewhere between $3 and $7 million. But, if you've got a third of all of your systems offline, that's pretty serious. And it was really the largest data breach for any American city in the country. And it took them a while to recover from this. If you remember when this happened, the water departments were not able to issue, bills to, citizens in Atlanta for up to 3 months. Even marriage license could not even be issued. So if you think in terms of your systems being down, you don't have access to that information, Has the information actually been compromised? Who has it? Who else is going to get it? Are they going to sell it? Those are all the questions that kind of come into play, and it really can create havoc on the way you do business, especially when you don't have access to your data and things of that nature. So that kind of puts things really in perspective. But let's go on to the next slide on protecting PII. So I've already talked about training, but I can tell you that basically your employees are really going to be the key to safeguarding and protecting PII, both in electronic sense, meaning your systems, and also in paper format. The success of protecting information really depends on everybody in your office, and it takes everyone working together to ensure that this data remains protected. And sometimes it's an uphill battle, but I think that's why training staff is really, really important. Sometimes you'll hear staff say, "Oh my gosh, we've had training 3 times this year on security. Is this necessary?" And the reason, and it really is, what it comes down to is the more trained people are, the more security savvy they're going to be, the more questions they're going to ask before they click on a link or they forward information or they have some sort of malware that is accidentally downloaded into their system. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is basically just biggest threats to your data and your network. So we've talked about phishing, social engineering, malware attacks, ransomware. We're going to talk a little bit more about weak passwords in a minute. Now, one thing that's not on here that probably should have been added is insider threats. IRS now requires any agency who has access to federal tax information, they have to do an entire section on insider threats in their yearly training. So we actually do it at OCSE, but I can tell you that insider threats is becoming a bigger problem within companies, and a lot of it's due to disgruntled employees. So make sure you work with HR, that you recognize the warning signs so that you can sort of address those issues head on. All right, so let's move on to the next slide on how to protect the data and your network. So we talked about, backing up your systems and your other important files. If your system becomes infected, you want to make sure that your data is stored off-site. So that is extremely important. And the reason you want to have your data stored off-site is because you want to have it in a separate location from your office. And you also want to make sure that that data is not connected to the network. So when you're doing these backups, or your IT department is doing your backups, you want to make sure that when they do the backup, that information is kept separate on some device that is not connected to the internet or the network. So those are some of the really important questions to ask your IT department, because you just want to make sure that the data is going to be readily available. But the problem is, if you have a network attack, some sort of a ransomware attack, if you've got your backup stored on the same network, there could be a possibility that ransomware attack could penetrate in through where you've got your backup data. So you just want to make sure that all of that is sitting somewhere else in a secure location and not connected to the network. Once again, training your organizations, I really can't say this enough. I think it's one of the cheapest and the most effective ways to really keep your staff trained and updated on cybersecurity. And it doesn't have to be anything, that takes, let's say, an hour to 2 hours. I mean, you could do a monthly security bulletin and talk 1 month about, how to be aware of ransomware attacks, how to prevent those. So you could take a different topic each month, putting those in newsletters with staff, even talking about various topics at all hands meeting is another great idea, just to hit on some of these security issues where you're not really spending a lot of time, but in the long run, it's certainly worth its weight in gold. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Antivirus scans are highly recommended. Now, I know these are really going to be done more by your IT departments, but the great thing about doing these scans is they can actually identify malware, any viruses that might be lingering out there in the systems. And one thing that's interesting is a lot of times these hackers will go in, plant this malware, some sort of viruses. They will sit on the system for weeks, months, I mean, even years at times, as what happened, I think, with Yahoo, for instance. That was a great example of where some of this malware sat there for 3 years, and it just collected lots of PII on everybody. So a lot of times doing these up-to-date virus scans will find that information, identifying any of the vulnerabilities within your organization, your networks, your systems, things of that nature. Now, quick scans, this is a question that has come up to me a number of times about, what all will quick scans really detect? So doing a quick scan of your system, that sort of just does a real quick check. That may not necessarily detect malware or viruses that are out there. So that's why it's important to do those full system scans, as much as possible. They do require more time, but like I said, they're really the more important thing. They're going to identify the viruses that are out there. Total global damage to businesses for cybercrimes in 2021 was about $5 billion. So that just goes to show you, the damage that can be done with these viruses when these scans are not done. Perfect example was Home Depot. The data breach they had in 2015, that exposed about 56 million customers and credit card information. And part of the reason this really happened with Home Depot is because they weren't really doing the full scans as much as they should have been, and that's why it really didn't capture this malware when it was planted in the beginning. And I think it went on for several months before their IT department actually realized what was going on. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about Office data, generally handling information, and some of the tips to go through this. So these are some of the things that we're just going to kind of talk about very quickly: password guidance, transmitting PII, storing information. If you're mailing information, what might be some of the best ways to do that? Destruction of documents, and also working remotely. So if you go and move on to the next slide, let's start with the password guidance. So basically, the thing with easy or generic passwords is they pose a really weak link to cybersecurity. And nearly 20% of these passwords can be compromised each year due to weak passwords. Now, the problem comes into play that, the recommendation for the character length of passwords keep changing, and unfortunately it keeps getting longer and longer. And it's now got to the point where most people, they've got a password for everything they log into, and it's really becoming extremely difficult to remember all these passwords. What I recommend is that you use a passphrase, because that way they're much easier to remember. You're going to be less prone to writing them down where someone else may get them. So I actually recommend using, passwords that are passphrases that will be somewhere between 12, 14, 16 characters. And the thing you want to do is just use a couple of capital letters, lowercase letters, some numbers, and special characters. So just kind of put those in the mix of your passphrase, and those will be much easier to remember. Now, there has been some questions that have come up about, there's now these new programs out there that you can get where you can go in and store all your passwords in one place so you can remember them. And I think that's not a bad idea if you're someone who can't remember a lot of passwords, and I'm actually one of them. So you can get these password programs where you can store all your passwords in one place. The thing I recommend for that is you just want to make sure that you are encrypting that document so that nobody else can get in there and hack into it or see it, especially if you've got that on a network somewhere. So you want to make sure you're just using some kind of encryption to protect that document, because the last thing you want is for someone to hack in and get access to 35 or 40 different applications or passwords that you may have. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so emailing PII. So obviously, the suggestion is, you want to use some sort of encryption when you're emailing PII to another party. So anytime you're using social security numbers, let's say date of birth, things like that, you really want to make sure that you encrypt that data. We recommend using FIPS 140-3 compliant software. That basically just means that it's been federally approved, reviewed, and tested by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and it's vetted as one of the more secure. Also, we recommend PII putting that in an encrypted attachment. Never put that in the main body of an email unless you can encrypt that entire email before it's sent. The other thing, not putting the passcode to decrypt that attached file in a separate email. So what we mean by that is, if I'm sending an email to Melissa and I have encrypted a document and I send it to her, and then I turn around and I send her a second email saying, "Hi, Melissa, here's your passcode to get in to decrypt the file." That's sort of defeating the purpose, because if someone hacks into the system, they could get that information. So what I basically recommend is that you call them, you use voicemail, you can text them the message on their phone with that passcode, but don't use a secondary follow-up email to do that. Okay, let's move on to the next one. On faxing, basically notify the recipient that that fax is coming. That way you're just kind of putting them on notice that you're sending it. Also recommend putting a disclaimer on that fax cover sheet. That way, if someone receives it that should not have had it, they're legally being put on notice. They're not to disseminate, duplicate, make copies of it. I mean, basically, discuss that information with anyone. So that's why those disclaimers are really important. Also, remaining at the fax until documents are transmitted, just so you know that they went through, and then advise that recipient to be there at the other end of the fax machine so they can receive those documents in a timely manner. That way they're not just lying around in the fax machine, especially if they have PII on them. All right, let's go to the next slide on storing PII. So it's never a good idea to store any personally identifiable information or sensitive information on your personal computer or your laptop. You really should not be doing that. Never store PII on portable media unless it's encrypted, once again, with that FIPS 140-3 compliant software. So a perfect example of that would be thumb drives. They hold a lot of information. So if you're going to be using thumb drives, things like that, you really want to make sure that that whole thing can be encrypted so that if you lose it, there's no risk of that data being compromised. Also, never store PII on any of your agency laptops unless they have full disk encryption. If they have full disk encryption on them, that's fine, because it basically means if your laptop was lost, misplaced, it would be extremely difficult for someone to get in and hack that laptop to get it open and have access to that information. The other thing we recommend is, you want to store PII on one of your network files, but just make sure that that folder is encrypted so that, you've got that extra protection on there against other people getting into it. A lot of times you can set up special access on your network where only certain individuals have access to those file folders. And then I would go a step beyond that and also encrypt any of those file folders that are in there that may contain sensitive information. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. On mailing, so mailing is one of these things where if you're mailing sensitive or PII information, if it gets lost, it's really hard to remediate that because a lot of times you just don't know who, what happened to it. One of the things that we recommend is, you're going to use 2 envelopes, put your PII or office sensitive information in that interior envelope and mark it confidential to be opened by the designated official only. Send that PII with whatever courier that has tracking software. That way you can track that envelope or package from the time it was picked up while it's in transit to the time it gets to the location where it's going. So that's really, really important, being able to know that information. Also, have that recipient notify you if they don't receive the document or the package in a timely manner. Most of the times when you're going to be mailing something and you're using one of these couriers with tracking software, even the United States Postal Service, they're going to be able to tell you, okay, this should be received by this party within, X amount of days. So you kind of have a general idea. And then if it's not there within that time frame, that's whenever you want to start doing some checking and finding out what may be going on. Was it lost in transit? Whatever the situation may be. All right, let's go on to the next slide. On destroying PII, basically you want to use a secure shred bin. If your offices have contracts with shred companies that are licensed and bonded, that's a great way to make sure your staff are protecting data. You can also use cross-cut shredders. We definitely recommend cross-cut shredders because they will destroy those documents in a manner that is not readable. It's very difficult to put back together. Also, having electronic media destruction machines is a good idea. A lot of times with the cross-cut shredders, they will do both. So you want to look for something that might be able to do both. Also, erasing electronic records, making sure that there's no trace of that PII. And then the rule of thumb, basically with physical or electronic records, once you are done using that PII, go ahead and destroy that information so that it's no longer traceable. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Working remotely, this is something we all do a lot of. Basically, you want to make sure that you're on a secure wireless network. One thing that I always caution people against is using public Wi-Fi, such as Starbucks, coffee shops, airports, hotel lobbies, things of that nature. And it's just because there's such a huge risk involved in using these. They're not really that safe. Hackers can very quickly spot these with Wi-Fi sniffers that they have or other apps. And it's really easy to get into your laptop, your devices, and steal that information. Using a virtual private network to encrypt your connection is really the best way to go. That's giving you a lot of additional protection. So you want to make sure that you're using VPNs, and that really does protect your data on your devices. And you can also use it on your cell phones for checking messages and things of that nature. All right, let's go to the next slide. So basically the impact, of what happens when data is lost or stolen, just to kind of wrap up, your agency reputation can take a hit. We've already talked about your data loss in terms of you not having access to it. But the other thing you've got to think about is, it can become expensive if you have any sort of information that's lost. You're going to have investigations, litigations, monetary losses. It can get expensive very, very quickly, not to mention your downtime. All right, let's go on to the next slide here. This is on incident response, just wrapping up. And the things that I always tell people is definitely have a plan in place, know what types of incidents to report. What are your roles and responsibilities as a director? What are your line managers' roles and responsibilities? And even, make sure that staff know what to do if they have some virus that hits their system. They want to know what they should really do to report that. So the key is getting that reported to management as quickly as possible, because the quicker you can start remediating an incident, the better that's going to be to protect the integrity and the reputation of your agency. So let's move on to the next slide. These are just a couple of incidents that we have received from OCSE in the last year, 2 years actually. So I wanted to give you a snapshot. Laptops being stolen from cars is something that happens. Ransomware has been another big one. Infected files, unauthorized data, even some office break-ins. A lot of times they're looking more for money and things staff have in their desk drawers. They're not really looking as much for PII, but that's something that you really want to remediate just to make sure. All right, I think that about wraps it up, Melissa. So I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I would love some questions if anybody has anything for me. Do we have anything in chat or?
We don't have anything in chat at the moment. Please feel free if you'd like to unmute or raise your hand or put something in the chat. Ken, I know you came off a mute. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much value there is to this question. Oh, I'm sorry, my camera isn't working right now, but but Danny, I've listened to what you've said with great interest, and I really appreciate all these common sense strategies. So I want that to be the starting point. Where I can't get my head, what I can't get my head around, or I can't drop, is that it feels like this is just like all whack-a-mole, or sticking my finger over holes in really old pipes that I know I might block one leak, but then later down the pipe it's going to pop again. And you talked about the various big breaches in the media that have happened, that Experian or one of the credit companies had. That, like, how in the world am I supposed to keep information private at my little agency with 9 staff and Experian can't?
Well, so that's a good question. And I can tell you, as technology evolves and improves and becomes more sophisticated, it also does create, a lot of more problems with these criminals, because let's face it, they are very, very savvy. And I think my response to you goes back to, number one, I think it's great that you have a smaller group of people, because with a smaller group, it's much easier, I think, to really train people. But I can tell you, like I said, I think the best thing you have going for you is the training and talking to the staff and just doing brown bag lunches if they're in the office, or just doing, like, let's say, a director's monthly email or something where you talk about various things and throw security into it. I think those are the best things you can do. And I will tell you, because we do so much training at OCSE, I have been surprised about the amount of staff that will pick up the phone and call me, and they're not afraid to say, I don't know if I'm about to do something wrong. I want to check with you first. But the key is they are actually calling me and questioning things before they do it. And that's the point you want to get to. You want to get to the point where your staff are in a proactive situation and not a reactive situation. And if you can get your staff there where they are trained, they are now thinking in terms of security and protecting data, you're going to be a lot better off in the long run, because those are the types of agencies where you're going to be less apt to have breaches in PII, not just in paper copies, but also with information attacks with your systems. So hope that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Absolutely. But good question. Yep.
And Crystal, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, we have the ability to clock in and out on our Wi-Fi network on our phones. Is it a bad idea to do that? Should they just not clock in on their phones, or should they use the Wi-Fi and then just get right off? Like, what is the security risk of that?
So they're clocking in and out on the phone is that just like for office protocol to let the managers know that they're at work, or can you give me a little bit of context with that?
Yeah, we use a system called Paycom, and so we can clock in either there's like little areas that you can clock in. You can clock in on an app or on your computer.
Okay. So the phones they're clocking in on, are these personal cell phones or agency issued cell phones?
It will be both. So like I have an
Okay.
agency cell phone, they do not.
Yeah. So I definitely recommend agency cell phones if you can do that. And the reason I'm saying that is because a lot of times there's better security through the IT departments and things like that with these agency phones. So if they are using their personal cell phones, my advice, Crystal, is make sure you have conversations with them. The apps might be security protected themselves, but also just making sure that whatever their, let's say their cell phone provider is, such as Verizon, T-Mobile, what have you, just make sure that all of those people that are using those personal phones are aware that they want to make sure without any reasonable doubt that that virus protection and all of that is updated. A lot of times, like Verizon will push this through, but I can't guarantee you that a lot of them do. So that's the conversation you want to have with personal cell phones.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Yep. Any other questions? All right, Melissa, I think we're right around 3:30. The only thing I will tell you guys, I've got a team that works with me. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Melissa or any of the staff in the regional office if you have any questions regarding protecting personal information. That's really what we're here for. We get questions from the states all the time. And we certainly want to help you out in any way that we can.
Thank you, Danny. I don't see any further questions in the chat or Crystal's hand still up, but Crystal, I assume that's still just a lingering hand unless you have something else. Oh, it went away. I did load into the chat. I loaded the slides for this presentation. I will also send out the recording with the slides to everybody that registered. So you should be receiving that via email as well. So you'll have the recording if you need it for further training opportunities, especially as you hire new staff. And with that, I appreciate your time, Danny. Thank you for joining us today and providing the training.
Absolutely. Very happy to do so. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.